Thank you all for making the time to talk to us today. We're here with Eddy Morales, Susheela Jayapal, and Maxine Dexter, who are all running for the Democratic nomination for the third congressional district. I think we'd like to start off by just having each of you give a quick introduction about why you're running and why people should vote for you. And we're going to go in order of what's on my Zoom screen. So Eddy, if you don't mind going first.
Not at all. Helen and the editorial board, thank you so much for having us today and getting a chance to share a little bit about ourselves with you and obviously the community that is the Oregonian. I'm running because I'm the child of an immigrant mother who came to this country in the trunk of a car, and I had 8 siblings who came in the backseat of strangers' cars with her, and she did that because she believed in the American dream. And when I was 6 years old, my mother moved us here to Oregon to escape domestic violence in Los Angeles. And for 38 years, I grew up here from elementary school all the way through our public university at the University of Oregon. In Oregon, when I went off to school, my mother had to go to Mexico to be with my dying grandmother. While she was there, she got a 10-year ban and died about 3 months before she was allowed to come back into the country. I also lost 2 brothers to gun violence, one here playing at a park in North Portland when he was a teenager. And I've lost a sister to opioid addiction and alcoholism 4 years ago. She worked on an assembly line and blew out her shoulder and was prescribed opioids, but really she was also going through a divorce and a lot of other issues. These are the things that have really motivated me for the last 25 years to organize and to make public policy change. These are the same issues that are being faced in our community by our residents here. Growing up, my mother would exchange childcare for us to have a place to live. So we moved around every couple of years. And she, sometimes we got an extra bedroom in someone's home, sometimes we got a couch, but really grew up housing insecure. When I got into office 6 years ago, I started working on these policies of creating multi-generational affordable housing here in Gresham, trying to end gun violence and lower crime, as well as address our climate change. And I feel like I've been very successful. And so when this position came up, a lot of people in my community encouraged me to run because these are issues that are felt district-wide and across the country. And I think I can bring my 25 years of experience, as well as my lived experience, to Congress to make change on the issues. Thank you, Helen.
Great, thank you. Susheela, can you please go next?
Thank you. I'll start with why I'm running. I'm running because I think we're just at a pivotal time in the country and in this district, a combination of national and local issues. On the national front, we have a Republican Party that's incapable of governing itself, much less the country, that is attacking our democracy, that's rolling back rights that we've taken for granted for decades. And here I'm thinking primarily of abortion, but there are others. And then on the local level, we have folks who are struggling every day, struggling with the cost of housing, struggling with putting food on the table, and obviously the crises of homelessness and behavioral health that we've been experiencing over the last couple of years. And I want to go to Congress because I want to fight for the bold policies that I think will create real change for the residents of this district and on those national issues that I mentioned. I think I'm the candidate for the job because I am the strongest progressive in this race. I've been clear and steadfast for a long time about pushing for bold policies that will create real change. And I'm going to give a few examples. One is on healthcare. We know that the cost of healthcare is skyrocketing and that we're not delivering the results that we need. I am a steadfast supporter of Medicare for all, because I think it's going to deliver a universal single-payer health system that's going to fundamentally shift the way healthcare is delivered rather than tinkering at the edges. On climate change, my stance on moving away from fossil fuels, my work on clean air, I've been recognized for my leadership there, have led to my being the recipient of all of the environmental endorsements in this race. Every environmental organization that's endorsed has endorsed me, from the Sierra Club to Friends of Earth Action to Food and Water Watch. On civil rights, I have been out front on abortion. I served on the Planned Parenthood board locally back in 2000, actually, when we became the first Planned Parenthood clinic in the country to offer medication-assisted abortion. And I have shared my own personal abortion story because I think that that's essential to advocating for the right to abortion as a fundamental freedom for everybody. And then finally, on the foreign policy issue, that's one of the most prominent of the day. I am the only candidate in this race to have early and consistently called for a ceasefire in Gaza. So first, because I am the strongest progressive in the race. Second, because I bring a really broad range of experience to this very complex and broad position. I have served as a lawyer. I have served in the business sector. I have been a nonprofit leader chairing boards of directors. And then most recently, I've been on the county commission. And then last, my coalition of support. Over those 30 years, I've worked with a broad range of leaders, and I have the broadest, most diverse coalition of local community leader support. That's going to be essential to people who've worked with me over my 30 years in the district who know my leadership. And that coalition is essential to understanding the needs of my constituents, all of my constituents, and to meeting those needs. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And Maxine.
Thank you so much. So Maxine Dexter, I'm a mom, a physician, and a state representative for the people of Portland. As a pulmonologist and critical care physician, I've spent 2 decades listening to patients in CD3, looking at the science and finding solutions that improve people's lives. Caring for people is my life's work. I've seen firsthand how so many Oregonians are struggling to live healthy lives because of bad policy. We see it in the healthcare and in the exam room much more profoundly than in any other sector. I hear it every day, whether I'm speaking to a patient whose child has overdosed unintentionally, helping a houseless person who cannot get a place to recover and keeps coming back in because of complications of being houseless, or rushing to the ER to care for a pregnant woman who has a complication of a pregnancy and is bleeding out. We can solve these problems if we have experts in the room, people who know the science and actually listen, but politicians often care more about scoring points than finding solutions. And what I have done in the Oregon legislature is find solutions. I know we can do more to help people. I take those stories to the legislature and turn them into policy, and have done it over and over. I know I can do more to help people, and I have. We've secured the strongest abortion protections in the country. We've passed historic investments in housing and in homelessness, and I led that $2 billion investment over the last 2 years. Expanded drug treatment programs that will help improve public safety and save lives. Closed loopholes in our firearm laws that put our kids at risk. I'm the only candidate endorsed by Everytown for gun safety and the National Organization for Women and the American College of OBGYNs, because we need people who understand the impact of these policies and understand firsthand how to care for them. Look, I'm not naive about the task at hand. Mega extremists are doing everything they can to take our rights away and undermine our democracy. And that's why we need to elect a proven leader, someone who really has shown that they know how to listen and find the root cause and work with others in a collaborative, bipartisan way in a divided government. And that's what I've done for 2 decades as a physician, care for everyone, regardless of their background or beliefs. As a healthcare leader, running the business in the largest healthcare organization in the Northwest, the physician group, and as a mom, leading our children to a better world. I am not going to leave it in worse shape than when I got into power. And we need to do that in Congress, and I will do just that. Thank you so much, and I appreciate your time and consideration.
Great, thank you. Let's see, let's start. Susheela, if you can start off with this question, and we'll just kind of go around. What would be your top 2 priorities in which you think you can make an actual difference in 2 years, and what would that look like?
I think anyone who promises to make a difference in 2 years is probably not really thinking about where Congress is right now. But the top 2 priorities I would work on would be housing and homelessness and climate change. And I think there are spaces here where we can we can make progress on discrete pieces of those. So on housing and homelessness, I think the federal government needs to get back in the business of actually building public housing. Senator Bernie Sanders has put forward the bill. He calls it the Green New Deal for public housing. And this calls for the federal government to reinvest. It started disinvesting in the 1980s, and that's one of the root causes of why we are where we are. It needs to reinvest. We need to repeal the Fair Cloth Amendment, which requires that we do not spend more on housing than we spent back in 1999. And do it in a way that also fulfills our climate change obligations. So on housing, I would push hard for that reinvestment in public housing, for significant expansion in vouchers, which is basically long-term rent assistance. We're lucky here that we have a local funding stream for long-term rent assistance. That has been a game changer, but we need it at scale that only the federal government can provide. At the current time, there's a 7 to 8 year waiting list for vouchers in Multnomah County. And if you're on the verge of being evicted, you can't wait that long to get that rent assistance. So we need the federal government to be back in the business of providing that assistance to everybody who needs it. And the third is to invest in home ownership, right? These are all parts of a spectrum around housing. And I think there are some really discrete things, including a piece that President Biden has included in his latest budget plan, which is to help first-time homeowners with down payment, whether in the form of no interest loans or grants, things like that. So those are a few things on housing. And then on climate change, obviously, the big things aren't going to be done in 2 years. But what I think what I can do, what all of us in any form of leadership have to do, is to advocate for the change we believe in, so that over time we are prepared when the opportunity presents itself. And on climate change, again, a range of strategies. I do think we've got to move away from fossil fuels, and I think working on carbon pricing is one of the key strategies for moving away from fossil fuels. And then there are other things that are already in place in a way. So preserving our forest land, that is, every acre of forest that we have is already doing the job of mitigating greenhouse gas emissions. And if we protect that, we continue to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then finally, creating resilience, making sure that our frontline communities have the resources they need. And again, here, I think there are some discrete resource things, not policy things necessarily, but resource that we can bring to bear, possibly even in 2 years, things like funding resilience hubs, funding tree planting in neighborhoods that experience extreme heat, funding heat pump exchanges. This was actually something that I got $500 in ARP funding for when I was at the county commission, for exchanging wood stoves. A lot of folks in my district still use wood stoves, and we got funding to exchange those out for heat pumps. Those are climate resilience measures that I do think are very doable.
Great. Thank you very much. Maxine, if you can go next, what are the top 2 priorities you would seek to focus on and to try to be effective in 2 years?
Yeah, thanks. The first thing I'm going to do is find the people doing the work that I want to get done, and understanding that the way you get influence is building relationships. So I will want to lean in on housing and homelessness, healthcare and climate. And the way I did it with Andrea Salinas when she was the healthcare chair, when I was a freshman lawmaker, was telling her I didn't care who got credit, but I was there to help pass the mergers and acquisitions bill, as well as the public option bill, because those are the next steps towards Oregon's universal healthcare system. And building that relationship with her, she then allowed me to amend my public option global budget bill, which we did in my freshman year, because I had built credibility with her and trust. I'm going to do that. I'm not going to have a gavel in my freshman year in Congress. I understand that, but I know how to build relationships and build that trust. The next thing is, in 2025, we have an enormous bridge project that we need to get infrastructure funding for. We've secured some of that. There's more to do. And as a federal delegate, I will understand who we need to leverage those relationships with, and how to bring those investment dollars to Oregon in a way that will get that bridge built. We cannot afford to let that go. And it has to be done with bike and pedestrian crossing, as well as high-speed rail and transit. And the high-speed rail is separate, but we need to get those investments, and those are out there with the Inflation Reduction Act. Finally, we have enormous opportunities to just continue to build relationships, from the federal to the state and to the local governments. And we know that we're not delivering in Multnomah County the way we need to. And I understand how to bring those forward, like I did for Healthy Homes with $15 million of investments, because I understood where those needs were. And the Albina Vision Trust, Senator Jama and I were able to get $25 million for that. So working with federal and local leaders, we'll be able to build the housing, the healthcare, and the infrastructure that we need for our state.
Thank you. And Eddy, how about you, your top priorities?
Great, thank you, Helen. And I love how much you all love digging into the policy and into the weeds of stuff. So I just want to say I appreciate that. We don't get the opportunity to do that very often. You know, I think I want to continue the work that I've been doing here around housing. When I'm out talking to the community, I know that housing is still one of the largest costs for most households and most individuals. And so, you know, I also know that the ideas of people living, you know, on their own or, you know, with a significant other and two children is not the case anymore. People are moving back in with parents. Parents are moving back in with children, grandparents, aunts, and uncles. So what I've been able to do here in Gresham is build multi-generational housing, 3 and 4 bedroom homes that are affordable so that people can move in to their homes. I've also been able to bring wraparound services to make sure that people aren't stuck as renters. And some of those services have been, you know, a 2-to-1 matching IDA program. So when people live in these places that are affordable, they're able to put away money towards a down payment. So I think we need to build more affordable housing. I think we need to make sure that we are refining our first-time homeownership programs that exist. Cost of homes have gone up, and a lot of the federal policies that are in place that then get moved through cities and states, you know, are out of date. The homes are more expensive than the limits that are provided for a lot of the first-time homeownership grants and programs. And so we need to really refine those efforts. I think the other piece, just to add different flavor to the conversation, because I do agree that we have to address climate change and there's an opportunity to create good paying jobs for our community. You know, I live on the east side of this district where people are still making 50 cents to the dollar for sometimes the same types of jobs that they would be getting on the west side. And I think that with climate investments and infrastructure investments like we just got recently in microchip, we're providing opportunities to create better paying manufacturing jobs for people in our community. But what I wanted to talk about was safety and violence. Like I shared with you, issues that have impacted myself and a lot of people in our community. We really did innovation out here on the east side, along with our legislators, our school districts, nonprofit organizations, and our police department to try to tackle this issue of violence and crime upstream by providing opportunities and preventative programs and creating an ecosystem that works well together. So we increased funding for our police. We trained our police department. And we made connections to nonprofits that we gave grants to provide these opportunities and interventions, and then looped in our school district. So we're able to track people, you know, before they're falling into the criminal justice system, before they're acting on crime and violence. And when I first started before this program, we had one of the largest gun violence years in our region. And we have seen that decrease since this new intervention. I think that this is something that was piloted here. It could be taken district-wide, statewide, and eventually to the country. And so really addressing violence, gun violence, and crime, along with housing and the environment are some priorities of mine.
Great, thank you. And Maxine, I think you go first on this question, and it gets a little bit into climate change and questions about how to take a national strategy toward it. But one aspect I guess I'm interested in is that there have been a number of news stories in recent months regarding just the overall demand for electricity increasing rapidly, but you know, not just people getting electric vehicles, but also just the additional data centers and just the trajectory for what AI is going to require. As a result, you have a lot more demand than what clean energy sources can provide, and it's leading to an increase in fossil fuel burning sources. How would you navigate that? I guess what is, is there a, there has been, pushes both in Oregon and elsewhere to, for instance, ban natural gas infrastructure and new construction. You have a lot of arguments for just an immediate drawdown in terms of carbon emitting or carbon intensive energy sources. How would you balance this? What would be your approach?
Yeah, thanks so much. I think the first thing that we need to do is make sure that we are bringing our communities along and making sure that our workers are getting the best possible investments from these transitions. Really, a Green New Deal means that we actually are building those workers here at home with the skills we need. For instance, with the offshore wind bill, which the IRA is going to be bringing enormous opportunities for us, we passed a policy to make sure that our labor protections here in Oregon are maintained, and that we bring the environmental community and the local communities along the coast through a plan so that nothing can get implemented without bringing community along. And it's critical because we have companies who can swoop in and build the infrastructure and then swoop out and not leave us with the workforce that we need. So bringing a true transition rather than imposition for our communities. We need transmission changes and upgrades right away. And that is an enormous investment, but we also have ways that we can do that effectively. We've got the workers here who can start doing that. And we've been working in the legislature on how to do that immediately. And you're right, we have to do it in parallel with understanding that AI and the demands are increasing. We cannot keep drilling fossil fuels. We have to stop drilling fossil fuels. And really, what that also means is that we're not stopping drilling on our own lands and then buying it elsewhere. We need to move towards true weaning of our dependence on fossil fuel infrastructure, or drilling and bringing in, whether it's imports or exports, on our own. So without the renewable expansion as we wean fossil fuel dependence, we're not going to get there. The last thing is just maintaining the clean water. Our water infrastructure is dismally underprepared for the amount of people who are going to be coming here. So whatever we do, whatever we're getting ready for, we have to anticipate growth because of climate refugees and the dependence that we're going to have in Oregon on expanding housing and infrastructure. We have to plan for a great number more people than we are anticipating right now because we're seeing water infrastructure across the country depleted.
Thank you. Eddy, I think you're next on this question, and essentially it's basically kind of looking at just increasing demands for electricity, where and renewables not there yet to make up the full need. How do you approach this? What is the right strategy for making sure that we can move forward towards that future while not leaving people stranded for power, for instance, or needing.
Helen, your question was very clear, by the way.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. I think we here on the east side, we really are facing the impact of the climate change in a way that I don't think a lot of places in our state are facing it. A few years ago, we were the hottest place on the planet, and over 100 people in our community passed away from that, from not having the infrastructure, the cooling, the homes to keep people safe. About a month ago, we also, saw people without electricity for 2 to 3 weeks in my community because of the ice storm. And so I know exactly what you're talking about when we say that, the energy is not there to sustain our current infrastructure that we have as we're continuing to do development. I think we can't lighten up on the importance of the research that we need to continue to do to find renewable energy. Like that has to happen and continue to happen. And, when I first became a counselor here in Gresham, we talked about the idea of turning our sewage into renewable energy and electricity. We talked about building generational affordable housing that would be run on solar. And we've been able to do that. But that's, again, really required a focus and an investment in that early research. I think, we need to update our electrical grid. I don't think it's as efficient as it could be. And I think we could be using infrastructure dollars not only to create good paying jobs and really rethink our economy under a kind of a Green New Deal that addresses, I think, racism and sexism that was created, and ableism that was created in our economy initially by hitting reset, I think this will provide an opportunity to make sure everybody has access to the job training for this sort of new economy. But I think the research, I think making really investments in efficiencies in our, again, electric grid, and then continuing to support things like offshore wind, solar farms here in our community, and even going further than that is what we're going to need to do. I think like a lot of things that I believe in, we can have a North Star, but we have to be very pragmatic about how we get there. Because at the end of the day, we can't afford to leave communities, particularly frontline communities like the communities that I come from, without power or without the resources that they're going to need. It is a life and death situation for our communities. And so we just have to be mindful and pragmatic about how we approach this transition to a clean energy and climate.
Great, thank you. And Susheela, what about you? How would you address this question?
Yeah, this really difficult problem and difficult question. I guess a few things. First, we can reduce the need for electricity, right? We are simultaneously increasing our use of electricity in order to move away from fossil fuels, from gas, for example. But there are ways to reduce electricity usage at the same time, such as, I'll come back to something like the Green New Deal for public housing. So retrofitting our buildings, making sure that we are really squeezing every ounce of energy efficiency out of facilities, buildings, any other source. So that's one, balancing what's happening. I think another is other ways to reduce greenhouse gases. Again, it's part of a big puzzle, and we are pushing on levers and balancing out certain levers with other levers. So if we can find other ways of reducing greenhouse gases, I mentioned forest land preservation, the agricultural sector is one that we haven't really tackled, and the industrial sector as well. We focused a lot on clean electricity and on transportation, but we haven't yet tackled industrial and agricultural emissions. So figuring out how to lower emissions there allows us to be a little bit slower on some of the other fronts. One other thought on reducing the use of electricity, moving towards electric vehicles, obviously necessary in order to move away from fossil fuel, but reducing driving reduces the need for electricity in that sector. And so investing in public transit, I think, is another key way of reducing our use of electricity. And then, of course, investing in the push for renewables, offshore solar, doing everything we can to make that faster and incentivize that at the same time.
Great, thank you. And Eddy, if you can go first on this question. Certainly we've seen the split on the Republican side of the House and just the dueling factions within the Republican caucus. But Democrats also have a split, or at least a spectrum, in terms of the most progressive toward the most moderate. Where would you fall in that spectrum, and how would you seek to affect the caucus as a whole?
Thank you, Helen, for that question, and for acknowledging that this division is not just between Republicans and Democrats, but it is within the Democratic Party in the base. And, I've got to serve as the treasurer for our Democratic Party here for the last 7 years, and throughout the state, really focused on recruiting people to run for office, building the local state party. And that party looked different in different parts of the state, whether you were dealing with more rural, moderate conservative areas to north and northeast, Portland, and that may have a larger representation of very progressive individuals. I have no interest in going to Washington, D.C. to seek celebrity or mudfling or, create even more division. I really identify myself as a pragmatic progressive. And let me explain why. 25 years ago, when I was a freshman at the University of Oregon, I was approached by a group of farm worker women who weren't getting paid fair wages and had bad working conditions. And I remember helping to lead at the time a boycott for the company that wasn't paying them that. And we were able to win them better wages and safer working conditions. And I remember thinking to myself, if these undocumented farm worker women could make demands like that and make improvements, then every other worker in this family can too. Back then, I believed in the DREAM Act and was advocating for the DREAM Act. This was 25 years ago. I was advocating for education that was free or less reliant on loans. I was advocating that healthcare was a human right for everybody. So I've been working at this for 25 years. And when I got a chance to be in Washington, D.C. and work on the DREAM Act and on healthcare, I knew that in order to move the needle forward, we needed to meet communities where they were at across this country. And I got a chance to work on the Affordable Care Act. And when I got a chance to work on that, I was assigned the states of Tennessee, North Carolina, Missouri, and Ohio. And my job was to bring members of Congress from these states forward. And it was a tough task. But the tack that I took was, if you get constituents from their communities who can come talk about their experience in not having healthcare, then you can move the needle. It doesn't hurt, it doesn't help to sort of fling mud from Oregon to try to move somebody in North Carolina or Tennessee. What it takes is going there and engaging their communities in the policy making process. And that's what I've done. And we were able to move some of those members to support the ACA, even though they didn't believe in Medicaid expansion in their states, especially in the idea of any sort of national healthcare system. That's been my tact for 25 years, is really focusing on the issues, bringing people who are impacted by these issues into the policy making. And it's much harder to get into this divisive politics. So I would like to say that I'm going to be a coalition builder, not just within the Democratic Party, but across Congress, with people who really want to address the issues that are impacting people's lives.
Great, thank you very much. Susheela, how about you? Where would you place yourself on that spectrum, and how would you affect the caucus?
Yeah, as I said at the outset, I identify myself as a strong progressive. And what I mean by progressive, I think I said this as well, but what I mean by progressive is really pushing for bold policies that make significant change rather than tinkering at the edges. Having said that, I think the way that we work with folks within the party across the aisle, the way I work with them and have throughout, whether my legal career or my county commissioner career, is to be really clear about my values, be very rooted in them, and then always be open for common ground. And I'll give you a few examples. And I'll say that I think that finding common ground and building relationships works best when we're solving a problem together. And so identifying common problems and then working to solve them, I think, is what allows us to build those bridges. So a few examples. Last summer, I did an exchange with a county commissioner from Union County. He's a Republican. We disagree on many things, including some third rails of Oregon politics, like gun regulation and taxes. But we met early in our terms as county commissioners, and I said, look, I don't know Union County. You don't know Multnomah County. Let's learn. No agenda, no policy list, nothing we're trying to persuade the other of. Let's just learn. And last summer, I went out to Union County, spent 4 days there. He took me around farms and ranches and a butcher shop and, all kinds of places where you wouldn't normally see me. And then he came to Multnomah County. And in that process, we identified common issues and common ground, and both of us moved a little on some of those. Examples of ways that I've used that approach to solve problems. I worked before I left the county on a law enforcement assisted diversion program. This is the kind of program that when someone's at the point of arrest, you find a pathway to get them out of arrest and connected to services. And I convened meetings of law enforcement. Again, very different political perspectives, very different perspectives on enforcement. But I convened meetings with the Portland Police Bureau, the Gresham Police Department, DA's office, court system, brought folks down from Seattle to talk about implementing this kind of a program, got a budget for it, and actually got agreement from the Gresham PD to move forward on it. I understand that since I left, that hasn't moved forward. But that's an example of bringing people together to solve a common problem where you can set aside the things that divide you and focus on the things that you really care about and that you can work together on. And then I'll provide one other example. Early in my tenure, I think it was during the pandemic, so maybe it was 2020. I chaired a legislative task force on finding revenue to help businesses transition away from dirty diesel. And the task force was comprised of business representatives and health environmental advocates who really didn't see eye to eye at all. And I remember when I took on that chairship, we were supposed to produce a report about how can we generate revenue to help businesses transition away from diesel. And when I took it on, somebody said to me, you're never going to be able to get them all to produce a report. We produced a report. We had significant disagreements, but we also all agreed that if the world is coming in which we have to transition away from diesel, we've got to figure out how to fund it. And through the process of working often behind the scenes with every member of that committee, we produced a report. So that's how I think we do it. Again, whether it's in the party or across the aisle, got to stay firm to the values and look for common ground and find common problems that we can solve together.
Thank you. Maxine, how about you? Where would you place yourself in the spectrum in the Democratic Party?
Yeah, thanks so much. Deeply progressive. There's no doubt my record speaks for itself, but also pragmatic and willing to work with others to get things done. So I have proven this with the fentanyl crisis. I had a child overdose, was pronounced brain dead by me after spending hours and overnight trying to bring him back. Understanding that that was something that could have happened to any of our children. It was an accidental overdose, and we passed the most impactful legislation with 13 policies in 2023. And it was with Republicans and Democrats at the table. I negotiated myself with many of my Republican colleagues. We took out the things that were too controversial, but we kept in all of the important things that we needed to get done. And frankly, it helped bring the Republicans back from the Senate because they knew we needed to pass the policy, and it was part of what ended the walkout in 2023. I know that I can get this done because I've been doing it. I've worked across the aisle. I have those strong relationships. When it was announced that I might be thinking about this race, I had many of my Republican colleagues reaching out because they know that a Democrat's going to win this seat, and they know that I listen and I want to get things done, and I work together with them. Representative Helfrich and I, as vice chair and chair of the Housing Committee, had a pledge that there were no surprises and we would keep our word. And together we got the most sweeping housing and homelessness packages across the finish line. And I kept my word and took a hard vote in support of the governor's package 3414 in 2023, because I was going to keep my word. And that is what led us to having the trust that we needed to get it passed in 2024. If I hadn't have done that, then we wouldn't have been able to start where we did. So I absolutely believe in strong progressive values, but we do have to find those opportunities for moving the ball down the field together. And we all want safe communities. We all want affordable housing and good schools and a clean air and clean water for our families. And it's just how you talk about it and where you're willing to make compromise. And unless we're willing to compromise, we aren't going to make those bipartisan pro-democracy changes that we need. We do have division on both sides, and we have to come together to make sure that we're moving things forward. Our country has done amazing things when we've worked together, and we've got to get back to that again.
Great, thank you. I think, Susheela, you go first on this question. And does the U.S. have a spending problem? Right now, the national debt is about equal to the GDP. It's projected to grow twice as fast as the economy over the next 30 years, I believe. And the government projects it will have to reduce benefits for Medicare and Social Security due to the declining trust funds for both those programs. Yet, all of you have talked about various investments, sizable investments. And I guess I'm wondering, does the US's fiscal health, how will you take that into account in terms of the priorities you're going to pursue?
Yeah, I think the balance is spending as well as revenue generation, right? And so I think the place to focus is on the revenue generation, and there are places where we can focus on spending, and I'll talk a little bit about both of them. On the revenue generation side, I think we need to focus on manufacturing, becoming again a center of manufacturing, which we had been historically. And that will be a way of generating the kind of revenue, boosting the economy that addresses the revenue side of the equation. That's just one example. We need to provide people, and I'm sort of sprinkling a whole bunch of different strategies here. If we provided people with healthcare That would boost the economy. That would boost our productivity. I'm sorry, childcare. That would boost our productivity. That is something that's holding particularly women back from entering the labor force. That's a strategy, again, for boosting productivity. So I think there are a whole host of things that we can do to boost productivity, generate revenue, that reduces the pressure on the spending side of the equation. And of course, there are things we can do on spending as well. For example, talked about healthcare. Moving towards a single-payer, universal single-payer healthcare system would save us billions of dollars on healthcare costs. And that is a way of reducing spending. So I think in general, the question is, for me, the question is going to be, how do we reduce spending, yes, where we are being wasteful, and I think healthcare is the primary place where that's happening, but then really focus on all of these other ways in which we can make ourselves a more productive country. And I think a lot of the programs that we talk about, certainly on the progressive side, programs that we talk about spending on, childcare, universal healthcare, housing, all of those are ultimately going to make us more productive because they're going to make people more stable and secure, and have livelihoods. Infrastructure spending. We know that infrastructure spending creates jobs. That generates revenue that, again, addresses the productivity side. So it's a great question. And I think we need to take a balanced perspective on both revenue and spending, and recognize that spending itself can address the problem, which ultimately is the question of, are you in a deficit?
And so in terms of like with healthcare, for instance, a universal healthcare program and how that can take spending out of the government, or are you looking at individuals' expenditures on healthcare, that it would be a savings on that side?
Yeah, in response to that question, I was really looking at the overall economy and recognizing the billions of inefficient dollars we spend on healthcare in the overall economy. So by and the reason that happens, in a very summary fashion, is because we've got this really fragmented, complicated system that is driven by private for-profit insurance companies. And those companies are dictating our healthcare, and they're sucking profits essentially out of the system. So in response to your earlier question, Helen, I was talking about the overall impact, but also multiple studies show that universal single-payer healthcare would reduce costs for 80% of Americans, because we're already paying incredibly high costs in the form of premiums, deductibles, out-of-pocket costs. And, we can simplify all of that with, it would be a tax that would fund it, but it would be a progressive tax as opposed to what's essentially right now a regressive tax that people pay for their healthcare.
Great, thank you. Maxine, same question for you. Does the U.S. have a spending problem?
Thank you so much, Helen. So what I would say is, number one, yes, we are overspending and under revenue rating. We need to hold the government accountable for delivering results with the taxpayer dollars that we have. We need to hold the wealthy and companies accountable. We have to I support ending letting the Trump tax cuts end. We need to remove the Social Security cap. We need to support IRS enforcement, as has been started on especially our wealthiest Americans and corporations with loopholes. 30% of our GDP approximately goes to healthcare. And what the problem is that there is perverse incentives for doing the wrong thing. We have pharmacy benefit managers who they're nonsense. They're an entity created to create revenue for the pharmaceutical companies. They need to be shut down. We need to create affordable medical education for our physicians, because they don't want to go into primary care, and primary care is where you prevent disease instead of doing the low value care that we are doing right now, which generates revenue. We have to end fee-for-service medicine. It is perversely incentivizing low value and no value care. So the first thing to do, absolutely, a universal single payer plan is, in the long term, absolutely the right thing to do, but we cannot get there with this system that we have right now. We have to build the investments that will allow for the health maintenance and the IT that will allow that to happen. We don't have a carte vitale like France has. That takes time to build. We've got to do that. In the meantime, we absolutely need to need to keep insurance companies living within a budget, and that is a global budget that incentivizes reimbursement with outcomes of health. And I've had a bill, we passed a pilot project. That is the first step, is putting people on a budget and making them pay extra if they go over their budget. So a capitated prepaid system that the insurance companies hold the risk, and they will manage their risk because they want to make money. And then you incentivize the right things, which is making sure people get their vaccinations, making sure that we have prenatal care and postnatal care for people, taking care of our elderly before they fall, and incentivizing those silos being broken down. So healthcare is also treated with our mental health and our housing shortages and investing upstream. We will not get there until we start actually putting people on a budget, and our insurance companies need to go on a budget first. So healthcare, that's an enormous opportunity. And then we also need to make sure that we are looking at other ways of revenue generation for housing. We need housing to be infrastructure, and until we raise more dollars, we aren't going to do that. We have to think about taxing the wealthiest top 1% of Americans at a higher effective tax rate. And I absolutely support that.
Thank you. And Eddy, how about you? Does the U.S. have a spending problem?
And, I think we are really feeling, people in our community are really feeling the burden of being taxed. I think Steve Dunn mentioned this in a piece he did at the end of last year, that Multnomah County had become the second most expensive place to live in this country. And, I think people are willing to pay resources to see issues be addressed, whether it's homelessness, housing, mental health. And when it doesn't get done, we get frustrated, and we start losing faith in the system that's supposed to handle big issues in society. And so I will say there is an opportunity for us to continue to grow our economy. And a couple of things, just to take a different tack from what my two colleagues have already said, is really tackling immigration reform and seeing that as a way to increase our workforce here and then our GDP. I talked to, this district has lots of farmers, within it. And in my conversations with them, they talk about the fact that the seasonal work is so antiquated as well. People are figuring out ways to grow products and produce year round, and not just during the summer times or times of, like, we have greenhouses, we have other ways to grow produce, and we're seeing produce fruit, rotting on plants. We also can figure out ways to keep people working here and producing year round. And so we really need to address comprehensive immigration reform and give people an opportunity to become citizens, a clear pathway, and also to come here to increase our workforce as well. I think we also need to figure out how we lighten the burden of people's finances so that they are able to make investments in our economy as well. So, whether we're talking about student loan debt and also the predatory lending that happens for people who don't have student loan debt, but to get taken advantage of around their home purchase or car purchases or other major purchases in their families. Obviously, healthcare and giving Medicare the ability to negotiate as a system can help bring costs down. So I think bringing the cost down for people and giving people the ability to spend more of their resources to strengthen our economy, again, with comprehensive immigration reform, allowing us to grow our workforce. And then I think, people have to pay their fair share. And right now, the wealthiest people in this country and companies are not paying their fair share of this. And, one of the things that we talked about and everyone talked about several years ago was that we wanted to see, a larger increase in the taxes that billionaires and very wealthy corporations were paying. And we actually have seen the opposite of that, where they're not paying, and the burden goes to middle and lower income households in this and bless you, Helen, Thank you, Steve.
Sorry, sorry.
Yeah.
I thought I put myself on mute. So
No, it's okay. I was looking at you. So, and so, I think, yes, like obviously continue to make sure people pay their fair share, growing our workforce here. And I think we have the ability to do that with comprehensive immigration reform. And then also figuring out how we lighten the burden of people's costs, is the way that we're going to get a stronger economy.
great, thank you. I do have specific questions for each of you, and so I'd like to start with you, Susheela, with this question. So until recently, you have spent the past several years as a Multnomah County Commissioner. Voters are certainly frustrated in terms of the pace of progress or lack of progress in the county on addressing homelessness, as well as excuse me, the untreated behavioral health issues. Why should voters promote you to a congressional seat?
Yeah. I am as frustrated as anybody is about our lack of progress. I think we should all be frustrated. Nobody wants to see, we all believe that people should be housed. We all believe that people should get the treatment that they need. And the reality is that these are crises that have been building for decades, right? In terms of homelessness, as I mentioned before, one of the root causes of homelessness is the lack of affordable housing. And one of the reasons we're in that situation is because the federal government disinvested from federal housing back in the 80s. Not until recently has the state paid attention to housing. It's really only been under the leadership of Governor Kotek that the state has tackled this as an issue. So similarly with behavioral health, we can trace the roots of where we are now back to deinstitutionalization at the federal and the state level without a plan for what was going to happen to folks who were deinstitutionalized. And at the state level, your reporting on this issue, I forget which reporter it was, but really excellent story that traces state disinvestment and neglect in our underlying behavioral health systems. So cities and counties have been at the bottom of that hill in terms of things rolling downhill, and have had these significant issues fall into their laps. And it absolutely is frustrating that we haven't made quicker progress. And all of them were exacerbated during the pandemic, of course. So, as a county commissioner, here's what I did. And I think the question is, how do we each leverage the roles that we have to the maximum extent? What I did in a role that has fairly limited power and authority, again, as your reporters have been discovering, is to find problems that I could tackle and to solve them. And I'm going to give you a few examples. I came into the county advocating for long-term rent assistance as a critical tool for addressing homelessness. At the time, it's hard to remember, but at the time, very few people, other than service providers, very few elected officials were talking or even understood what long-term rent assistance was. I came in, I organized briefings for the board, I got funding for a pilot project, I talked to legislators, and of course, with the advocacy of many, many people, we passed the Supportive Housing Services Measure, which included long-term rent assistance. And that has been a game changer. And I want to make sure to distinguish long-term rent assistance from short-term. The game changer is long-term rent assistance. We need short-term as well, but that's an example of something I worked for. Another example, I also identified early that a real problem, and this is it is going to continue to be a stumbling block for all government entities for a long time, is that we rely on nonprofit organizations for so much of the work that we need done, so many of the services. And nonprofit frontline workers simply are not paid enough. They are paid so little that some of them, we've got this anomaly, unsustainable anomaly, that somebody who works in a shelter might themselves be housing unstable. And so throughout the course of my time at the county, I flagged this issue, I raised the issue. I finally was able to get an additional 2% in wages. I think it was in the 22 budget. And more importantly, was able to push the county to say, yeah, we need to tackle this in a systemic way. And as a result, the county signed on to a program with Oregon Solutions that brings together all of the funders, because it can't be solved just by the county. It has to be the county, the city, the state, philanthropy, all of whom get together and say, how do we fix this underlying structural problem of a wage gap for these really essential workers? So that's the second example. A third one, much more discreet. You know, those were big issues that I tackled and kind of boulders that had to be pushed uphill. Here are a couple more concrete ones. I identified that, well, key piece of solving or addressing homelessness is to be able to put people into apartments. Multnomah County had a system that was fragmented. We had 12 to 20 nonprofit agencies looking for apartments into which to place people. And then we had many, many landlords who had apartments looking for someone to rent them to. But everybody was running around looking for apartments individually and separately. I identified the need for a meeting place for a centralized, coordinated way to do this work. So that you'd have a centralized place where landlords could come, list their apartments for inventory. You would have a place where service providers could come and find apartments for their clients. There was resistance to this at the
I'm worried about time.
I'll wrap it up in just 1 second. Thank you.
Helen, do we have a hard stop here?
I texted the person to ask if we can start 10 minutes late, but yes, we should wrap up soon.
So I'll wind that example up just to say, in the face of significant resistance, I was able to put together, bring an agency and create a program, or push the joint office to create a program that served the centralized function. So that's the work I did at the county, and there's a long list of those kinds of projects and resources that I brought to bear on my website. It was really identifying very concrete problems and bringing resources and solutions to bear on those.
Thank you. Maxine, you did address this earlier, but I do want to just put a finer point on this. Your successes in the legislature have come while a legislature was dominated by Democrats and the governorship was held by a Democrat. That may not be the case at all in Congress. You know, it's unclear who will have control of the House, who will be the president. How can you assure voters that or what would you focus on in order to be effective, even in a climate where Democrats don't have any control?
Yeah, thank you. And I think that that's really emblematic of what we have to plan for is durable policy as much as possible is going to be bipartisan. The issues that we are addressing are bipartisan. So housing, climate. If we don't talk about it as climate, if the Republicans are in charge, we still can talk about clean air and clean water. And those are things that we know are at risk right now with forever chemicals and whatnot. So there are things that we can work on together. And I think what I will do is what I have done all along is finding out what people care about. Really having relationships. As a physician, I take care of everyone. I don't care what their background is or who they love or what their beliefs are. We meet each other and we treat each other as humans. And my Republican colleagues on the committees that I've chaired have given me enormous credibility for how I treat them. And it's uniquely humane, giving them time to speak, making sure that I hear their questions and don't ignore them. And I think when you show up with true compassion and curiosity, that you can build those relationships. And we must. The durable policymaking for the future requires that we don't continue to swing the pendulum. We have to move it forward. So I will show up and work with the people who are doing the things that I care about. I know that some folks are not going to be welcoming or even worthy of spending a lot of time with, but the vast majority of people are there to do the work. And what I also know is that politics is a stage that people perform on when they're under the camera on the floor, and then we all go to the lunchroom and talk to each other about our children and our lives, and we build trust that way. I don't marginalize people because they have an R, or they don't believe that they're as progressive as I am. I believe that we all have shared values, and I've seen it as a physician, and that's how I'm going to build those relationships in Congress. And when the pendulum swings back to us being in the majority, I will continue to treat people with respect, because that is what we do as humans, and that's what we should do as leaders.
Great, thank you very much. And Eddy, last question is for you. A number of the achievements that you noted on your questionnaire kind of really focused on very locally focused, obviously as a Gresham City Councilor. But how do you, I guess, why do you think you would be, or how can you assure people that you'll be effective going from the local level to federal and in achieving what your goals are?
Okay. Thank you, Helen. Yeah, I focused on these local things in my questionnaire with you all because these are the most recent things that I've worked on, and these are the issues that I can really point to a building or point to a policy or research that shows that my work has actually had impact. The truth is I'm the most experienced person running for this position. I've been able to do policy at the national level, again, helped craft the DREAM Act, which became DACA, helped to secure the votes that we needed for the Affordable Care Act. I've worked in Florida to restore voting rights for returning citizens who've been incarcerated. I worked in Arizona to repeal policy that had show me your papers laws and tormented our immigrant communities there. And I worked with Stacey Abrams, in Georgia on a 10-year plan to really change the direction of that state. I've got 25 years of getting real work done in this space in policymaking. I know how DC works. I lived there for also 13 years and was able to move federal policy and have a lot of relationships that I'm going in with that, quite frankly, no one else on this slate of candidates has. And so I've done the work nationally. I've done it locally. In all places, I've been able to work with, a bipartisan group of people to get things done. Gresham is more moderate than Portland, and my council is made up of 7 people who have equal votes, and I've been able to move those 4 votes when we've needed to get stuff done. And I would die to have 5 people that I'd have to move to get stuff done. But to think of 435 people that we're going to have to work with, I think I've done that, and I think I can continue to show that I can bring people along and tap into my relationships all across this country to move individuals on federal legislation.
Great, thank you so much. I wish we had time to allow each of you a couple minutes to wrap up, but this has been a really great conversation. I appreciate everything you brought to it and all the time that you made available. If we have any additional questions, we'll follow up by email or phone. But in the meantime, thank you very much. This was a great discussion.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all for your time.